Good morning. As many of you know, my dad is very sick. If you've attempted to talk to him on the phone this week, you know that he has indeed lost his voice. I am a little suspicious of it because it happened right after Harbaugh was benched for the season, and I'm sure my dad does not want to talk about that with anyone. So he's found a convenient way to get out of that. But no, he has been sick for quite a while. Please do continue to pray for him. Unfortunately, this week it did take his voice, and so he's out of the pulpit, and I am able to fill in for him today. Now, we're going to take a step aside from our study on Revelation, but not completely. I've been working through the book of Daniel with the teens over the last few months. And in Daniel, we see a series of prophetic visions occur that predict things that are to come. Some of those things directly tie into our Revelation study, and they add support to what John saw in his revelation. In fact, some see Revelation as a continuation of Daniel's visions. Daniel chapter 11 is where we are going to spend the bulk of our time today. Now, Daniel 11 is an incredibly interesting chapter, especially if you love history. Through a vision, Daniel accurately predicts the rise and fall of kingdoms over a period of 400 plus years. Now, by the time we get to Daniel 11, Daniel has already accurately predicted the fall of Nebuchadnezzar and the fall of the Babylonian Empire. Daniel has also, in his lifetime, risen to the status of a trusted advisor and administrator in not one, but two of the greatest empires that the world has ever seen: the Babylonian Empire and the Persian Empire. Now, my purpose today is not to simply do a history lesson. My purpose is to show you through the text that Daniel's predictions are to be trusted. Emperors trusted Daniel. They not only trusted Daniel's judgment and his interpretation of dreams and visions, but they also entrusted Daniel with administrating over their kingdoms. Daniel's writings about what would occur have been 100% accurate. But some of what he predicts at the end of chapter 11 and then on into chapter 12 have not yet come to pass. But it will. And I want you to leave today convinced that it will. Either Daniel predicted 400 plus years of history completely 100% correct and then failed to accurately predict end times, or Daniel is correct in his entire prediction, which also helps us then trust that John is correct in his vision of Revelation. So let's begin. We're going to take portions of Daniel's vision in chapter 11. We're going to discuss then how they relate to world history and what we know did indeed occur. And we're going to see just how correct Daniel was in his prediction. And I remind you before we get into this, Daniel predicted these events hundreds of years before they occurred. And he predicted the course of history over a span of 400 plus years. Daniel chapter 11 verse 2 says this, "And now I will show you the truth. Behold, 3 more kings shall arise in Persia, and a 4th shall be far richer than all of them. And when he has become strong through his riches, he shall stir up all against the kingdom of Greece." Now the first 3 kings that are mentioned are Cyrus, Smerdis, and Darius. The king who is the 4th, who is richer than all of them, is Xerxes, who is arguably the wealthiest emperor that the world has ever known. His wealth, it's hard for historians to even talk in terms that help us to understand his wealth because we don't have a modern correlation to it. Now that's stunning if you think of things such as Amazon and Apple and how wealthy they are now. We think of them as mighty big corporations within our country. Xerxes' wealth surpassed that tremendously. What we're going to see over the course of Daniel chapter 11 is a lot of world's greatest records be set and then broken. You have Nebuchadnezzar from Babylon, who is the greatest emperor the world had seen up until him. Cyrus the Great, who defeats him and takes over the Babylonian Empire as well as more, who then becomes the greatest. Then Xerxes, who becomes wealthier than either of them. Then you have Alexander the Great, that if you talk about landmass size, he surpasses all the empires before him. And then after that, you have the Roman Empire that surpasses all of them in both size and strength. In Daniel's vision, one after another will rise, and one after another will fall. An important theme in the book of Daniel is that nations that mock God will fall. It is their absolute destiny. If you study the Old Testament spanning thousands of years, you can only come to the conclusion that any nation that mocks God will fall. There is no other possibility. There's no other destiny for them. No matter their strength, their size, or their wealth. If they are mocking God, they are doomed. Daniel 11:3-4 says this, "Then a mighty king shall arise, who shall rule with great dominion and do as he wills. And as soon as he is arisen, his kingdom shall be broken and divided toward the four winds of heaven. But not to his posterity, nor according to the authority with which he ruled, for his kingdom shall be plucked up and go to others besides these." This is a reference to Alexander the Great, who ruled between 336 and 323 BC. When it says as soon as he is arisen, well, Alexander the Great conquered the known world by age 26. Whenever I read about Alexander the Great, it causes me to do some self-reflection on where I'm at age 39. By 26, Alexander had conquered the known world. By age 32, he was dead. Here's an interesting tidbit to add to it. Nebuchadnezzar, the greatest king of Babylon, died in his own palace in Babylon. His son, Belshazzar, would later die in the same palace when the Medes and the Persians conquer it in one night, following Daniel's accurate prediction of the writing on the wall, if you ever studied through the book of Daniel. We just actually went over that with our Bible Institute kids on Sunday morning, the writing on the wall. Darius the Mede would then rule in Babylon from that same palace, and Darius, although we don't know for sure, he most likely passed away in that palace, following, once again, Daniel's accurate prediction that the Median Empire would fall away while the Persian side of the empire would become greater. We see a parallel prophecy of that repeated in Revelation, by the way. Later, Alexander the Great from Greece would conquer the known world and take up residence in that same palace, where he too would die from being poisoned or from drinking too much bad wine. No fewer than 4 of the world's greatest emperors that have ever been died in that same palace. 3 empires have fallen in that palace. Saddam Hussein, who fancied himself as the heir to the Babylonian throne, built himself a palace on top of those ruins in 1995. The U.S. military briefly occupied that palace in 2003 when we went into Iraq. So back to Alexander, he had no heir. He had no heir. This is why verse says, not to his posterity. Instead, his kingdom was divided among 4 of his generals, none of whom were as strong or as clever as he was, which is why it says here in the verses, nor according to the authority with which he ruled. And when it says, divided toward the 4 winds of heaven, one ruler took the kingdom to the north, one took the kingdom to the south, one took the kingdom to the east, and one took the kingdom to the west. And shortly after this, the kingdom to the west and the kingdom to the east begin to fade away out of history, leaving the north and the south to go to war against each other for hundreds of years. And that matters. So here is the northern kingdom, here is the southern kingdom, and smack dab in the middle, if you want to go between the two without dying in the Arabian desert, you have to pass through Jerusalem. You pass through Israel. So that's what we end up with. The Ptolemaic Empire of the south and the Seleucid Empire of the north, with Israel right smack dab in the middle of the conflict. The Ptolemaic Empire is named after Alexander's general Ptolemy, and the Seleucid Empire is named after Alexander's general Seleucus. Ptolemy would name his son Ptolemy, who would name his son Ptolemy, all the way down until Daniel predicts all of them down through Ptolemy the 8th. The Seleucus would name his heirs either Seleucus or Antiochus. And Daniel predicts correctly all the way down through Seleucus IV and Antiochus IV. Now let's see how correct Daniel continues to be in his predictions. Verse 6 of Daniel 11. After some years they shall make an alliance. And the daughter of the king of the south shall come to the king of the north to make an agreement. But she shall not retain the strength of her arm, and he and his arm shall not endure. But she shall be given up, and her attendants, he who fathered her, and he who supported her in those times. Now this verse is very confusing unless you know history, because here's what actually happened. Around 250 BC, Ptolemy II, king of the south of Egypt, sends his daughter Berenice to the north in an attempt to have her marry Antiochus II, who's now king of Syria, king of the north. Antiochus thinks Berenice is beautiful. He likes what he sees. Problem, he's married. He's married. So he decides, no big deal. I'm an emperor. I'll divorce my wife and marry Berenice, and I'll have a child with her, and that child will rule both the north and the south. But he forgets to account for his wife, the wife he's currently married to, who says, nope, I don't want to be divorced from an emperor, and turns around and poisons Antiochus. He poisons Berenice, she poisons Antiochus, poisons Berenice, and poisons all of her attendants. They all pass away. Hence, she shall not retain the strength of her arm, and he and his arm shall not endure. In that same year, then, Berenice's father, king of the south, down in Egypt, also dies. So instead of these kingdoms being united through one bloodline, in 1 year's time, they both lose their rulers. So she's given up, her attendants are given up, her father is given up, and Antiochus, he who supported her, the king of the north, is given up. You see how much sense this verse makes when you understand history? Daniel predicts it 100% correct. And it gets better. There really, really ought to be a movie made about all of this. It's stunning what occurs. So we go on in Daniel 11, 7 through 9. And from a branch from her roots one shall arise in his place. He shall come against the army and enter the fortress of the king of the north, and he shall deal with them and shall prevail. He shall also carry off to Egypt their gods, with their metal images and their precious vessels of silver and gold. And for some years he shall refrain from attacking the king of the north. Then the latter shall come into the realm of the king of the south, but shall return to his own land. Berenice, the daughter of the king of Egypt, who was just poisoned, had a brother. His name is Ptolemy III. Okay, they don't really get creative on names here. In retaliation for his sister dying, he doesn't know what happened. He just knows his sister died. He didn't know that it was a wife who was very angry, who poisoned. He thinks that the north has just poisoned and murdered his sister, and he is furious. And in retaliation, he raises an army to head off to the north. Well, he conquers the kingdom of the north. And he takes all of the gold, the silver, and the false idols back with him to Egypt. Now, here's an interesting thing. The false idols that he carries back to Egypt, some of those false idols date back to the Babylonian Empire. Some of them are the Persians' false idols. Some of those are the Greek false idols. And he brings them to where? To Egypt. These false gods have been carried around by different armies at this point for 330 plus years. They've just been changing hands. Now, if that doesn't tell you that these false gods have no power, I mean, it's ridiculous. Now, after ransacking the capital city of the north, which was named Antioch, Ptolemy III makes a peace treaty with the new ruler of the north, who is named Seleucus II. Now, this mostly holds, this is one of the longest periods of peace during any of these rulers. This mostly holds during their lifetimes, except for one short invasion by Seleucus into Ptolemy territory. Doesn't last long, and he turns and heads right back, which is why it then says at the bottom here of verse 9, then the latter shall come into the realm of the king of the south, but shall return to his own land. Even Daniel got that little tidbit correct. He's still batting 1,000 in his predictions. Now, for the sake of time, we're going to skip over 11 verses. Brother Gordon came in this morning and goes, "You're not going to get through that in an hour." He's right. What I'm going to do is I'm going to skip a lot so that we can. I do recommend, if you find this interesting at all and you want to just keep seeing how Daniel just kept getting this right, get a good study Bible, get a good commentary that points out the history that occurred, because there's a lot that I am skipping over. Verse 20 says this, then shall arise in his place one who shall send an exactor of tribute for the glory of the kingdom. But within a few days he shall be broken, neither in anger nor in battle. We now skipped ahead to Seleucus IV. Remember, the northern kingdom names their people either Antiochus or Seleucus. Well, Seleucus IV comes into power after his father is killed by an angry mob. And prior to his reign, the Romans have risen to power. That's a new thing that's come in at this point, the Roman Empire. And they're charging the northern and southern kingdoms a tax. And the tax is pretty much this: you either pay us and you can continue to exist, or you stop paying us and we're just going to take you over. So Seleucus IV knows he needs to pay this if he wants to hold on to power, and he gets the idea, I know what I'll do. I'll head down to Jerusalem, I'll raid the temple that's full of wealth and gold, and that will cover the tax. Right before doing that, he has a terrible nightmare, and it scares him. He has something pertaining to raiding the temple is in his nightmare. And he decides, I'm not going to do that, but he still needs the money. So what he decides to do instead is to send a tax collector to Jerusalem to levy a tax against the people, and that will pay, and then he'll be able to send it off as tribute to the Roman Empire. Problem. That doesn't fit with God's plan either. The very tax collector that Seleucus IV sends off to levy this tax ends up poisoning him and killing him. Thus, he does not die in anger by an angry mob like his father at the end of verse 20, nor in battle. He died by poison. This leads us then to one of the worst rulers that the world has ever known. Verse 21, in his place shall arise a contemptible person to whom royal majesty has not been given. He shall come in without warning and attain the kingdom by flatteries. Armies shall be utterly swept away before him and broken, even the prince of the covenant. And from the time that an alliance is made with him, he shall act deceitfully, and he shall become strong with a small people. This is in reference to Antiochus IV. That's who we're on now. We're now all the way down to Antiochus IV. He is the little horn that's mentioned in Daniel chapter 8. Once again, we see other prophecies referring to the little horn. He is terrible, and I can't say that enough. Most of these emperors that are dealt with in Daniel chapter 11 were awful people. They were terrible. The fact that the text points him out as contemptible shows that he is extra terrible. His long name was Antiochus Epiphanes. I almost said that the wrong way. Epiphanes. Antiochus Epiphanes, which he gave to himself because Epiphanes means manifest one. In other words, he referred to himself as a god. But people called him Antiochus Epimanes because Epimanes translates to madman. He bribed his way to the throne using flatteries to take a throne that did not belong to him. Well, the rightful heir to the throne sat in prison in Rome. Now, what's going on during this time is the southern kingdom's having issues of its own. Ptolemy VI is at war with his brother Ptolemy VIII, and Ptolemy, now they're naming brothers Ptolemy, so it gets even more confusing. It's not just the firstborn son anymore. Now they're just naming them all Ptolemy. Ptolemy VIII has stolen the throne from Ptolemy VI. Ptolemy VI gets the idea, I'm going to go and get my throne back, but I need help. I'm going to go to Antiochus, and I will form an alliance with him, and I will then come back and defeat my brother and take the throne back. But after being in Antiochus's presence for a while, he realizes, goodness gracious, this guy really is a mad king. He's crazy. I'm not going to do this. This isn't going to work out. He's going to kill us all. So he goes back to his brother and he says, look, I'm going to forgive everything. Just joint rule with me. We'll rule together as equals, but we have a bigger problem with Antiochus. And they were right. They did. Well, now Antiochus, the madman, is even more angry because now not only does he hate the Ptolemaic Empire anyways, but Ptolemy VI has betrayed him and joined with his brother. Through the next few verses, we learn that Antiochus invades the southern kingdom including Judea and Egypt, without warning, in retaliation on the Ptolemy brothers. He does so with more success than his fathers had ever had before him, as Daniel also predicts, and hauls back great spoils of war to the north. And that brings us to verse 28. It says, "And he shall return to his land with great wealth, but his heart shall be set against the holy covenant, and he shall work his will and return to his own land." All right, here's an example of Antiochus IV being terrible. On Antiochus IV's return from a raid on Egypt, he stops in Palestine. That, as we saw on the map, is right there in between. And on his way in there, he finds that the Jews are revolting. They have good reason to revolt. Antiochus had set up a false high priest. He'd removed the correct high priest, set up his own false high priest as in charge, a high priest who's worshiping Greek gods. He finds the Jews revolting. Now, the Jews were revolting because they actually had misinformation. They had heard that Antiochus had just died down in Egypt. He had not. Antiochus is furious and turns around and proceeds to murder 80,000 men, women, and children. 80,000. That is why it says he was set against the holy covenant. Daniel 11:29-30 says, "At the time appointed he shall return and come into the south, but it shall not be this time as it was before. For ships of Kittim shall come against him, and he shall be afraid and withdraw, and shall turn back and be enraged, and take action against the holy covenant. He shall turn back and pay attention to those who forsake the holy covenant." Now, this is crazy. This is another great candidate for a movie. This time, Antiochus goes down and invades Egypt against the Ptolemies again. The two brothers with the same name, though, have allied themselves this time with Rome. Now, this is something that lends a lot of credibility to Daniel having predicted this ahead of time. There are some people that think, wow, he got it so correctly. This had to have been written later. There's a lot of indication to know he did indeed predict it. One is that he uses the phrase ships of Kittim to refer to the Roman navy. Rome did not exist when Daniel made this prediction. What did exist was the area known as Kittim that wasn't that notable at the time, other than that's what it was. It was known as Kittim. By the time this event happens, where Antiochus is marching down, they don't even use the word Kittim in history. It's not being taught. It's not being spoken. No one's using that. What they are using is the Roman Empire. He predicted this ahead of time before Rome even existed as a world superpower, and refers to it as the region that they came out of, which is Kittim. So, the Ptolemies have allied with Rome. The ships of Kittim once again refer to the Roman fleet, and here's what happened. The Roman commander, Gaius Popilius Lionus, met Antiochus, once again the madman, keep that in your mind, near Alexandria, and he hands him a letter from the Roman Senate. The letter tells Antiochus, you have two options. You either leave Egypt now, or you risk war with Rome. And as Antiochus is reading this letter, this ultimatum, the general draws a circle in the sand around him. Antiochus gets done reading it, looks at him, and the general said, one more thing. Do not leave that circle until you tell me what you're going to do. Now, you talk about making a madman angry. He just boxed him in. Now, as mad as Antiochus is, he makes a very wise decision and leaves Egypt. And where does he go on his way home? Right back through Jerusalem. He is livid. This time when he arrives in Israel, he decides, okay, I'm going to do it even worse than before. He tells his troops, let's celebrate. Let's celebrate with the Palestinians. Let's celebrate with the Israelis. Let's celebrate with them. And what he does is he begins that. They celebrate for a day, then another day, then another day, until the Sabbath. And on the Sabbath, the troops turn and murder everyone they can get their hands on. He waited till the holy day set aside to God to begin the massacre. He then sets up a false high priest who practices the Greek religion, thus, as the text says, paying attention to those who forsake the holy covenant. 31 through 32 says this, forces from him shall appear and profane the temple and fortress, and shall take away the regular burnt offering, and they shall set up the abomination that makes desolate. He shall seduce with flattery those who violate the covenant, but the people who know their God shall stand firm and take action. Daniel also gets this prediction right. Antiochus profanes the temple. He stops the burnt offerings to God, and they set up an idol to Zeus. They then burn unclean animals, pigs most likely, to Zeus on the altar. This is the abomination that makes desolate at this time. Now, we learned about the current abomination of desolation last week, the Dome of the Rock that sits on the temple rock. Knowing that this is the abomination that makes desolate spoken of in Daniel lends credibility to that. Here's why. Both are outward, public, blasphemous affronts to God. Both sit right on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. They're not hidden away. They're not where someone thinks, oh, that might be the abomination of desolation. The world doesn't know about it. No, they are very public. They are out there. They are prideful, arrogant affronts to the one true holy God. Those who took action that's mentioned at the bottom here, the people who know their God shall stand firm and take action, that's most likely a reference to Mattathias and his 5 sons, who then lead the Maccabean revolt, reclaim the temple, and rededicate it to the Lord. Now, once again, I skipped a lot for sake of time, okay? Please get your hands on a study Bible that's good and has notes on this. Get your hands on a commentary. You will see just how amazingly accurate Daniel's predictions were. The accuracy is important because through the rest of the text, we're going to see Daniel predict things that have not yet occurred, but rather are still coming. They are events that John also sees in Revelation. What I'd put forth to you is just how unlikely it would be that Daniel would get everything we have talked about so far and much more 100% completely correct and then somehow have a big swing and a miss on end time stuff. Rather, I would say we can say with certainty that the rest of Daniel's vision will too come to pass. It's going to happen. Verse 35 says this, and some of the wise shall stumble, so that they may be refined, purified, and made white, until the time of the end, for it still awaits the appointed time. First of all, here in verse 35, we see some of the same terminology that we've already dealt with in Revelation. The Christian church will be refined, purified, and made white due to persecution. Now, this could be talking about persecution during Antiochus IV's reign. It could be. But Daniel includes phrasing that seems to say that he is looking further out. He says, until the time of the end. And I believe that from this point in Daniel 11, the vision shifts to talking about end times and brings up events that we will see in Revelation chapters 11 through 16. And then what we're not going to talk about today is Daniel chapter 12, but I see that as being repeated in Revelation chapter 20. Let's take a look. Daniel 11:36. And the king shall do as he wills. He shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak astonishing things against the God of gods. He shall prosper till the indignation is accomplished, for what is decreed shall be done. Now, some scholars, as I said, think that this is talking about Antiochus IV still. Other scholars believe this is talking about the coming Antichrist, which is where I stand on it. The Antichrist is going to do as he wills. Antiochus IV was not actually able to do as he willed because he was stopped by the Roman Empire. The Antichrist is going to exalt himself. Okay? Elsewhere in Scripture, we see the Antichrist talked about. One passage is 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. Let no one deceive you in any way, for that day will not come unless the rebellion comes first, and the man of lawlessness is revealed, the son of destruction, who opposes and exalts himself against every so-called God or object of worship, so that he takes his seat in the temple of God, proclaiming himself to be God. The Antichrist is going to exalt himself above everything else and proclaim himself to be God. He's going to take a seat in the temple of God. Now, I'm not going to go into all the possible interpretations of that, but what we know without a doubt is that the actions of the Antichrist will be clear, outward, and public. They will be in defiance to God. So I say that because I don't want you to fall into the online conspiracy rabbit hole of thinking that somehow the Antichrist is hidden away someplace, like at the UN, and he's in the dark pulling the puppet strings of world powers. That does not line up with the text. When the Antichrist is in charge, everybody is going to know he's in charge, and he's going to tell everybody he's in charge, and more than that, he's going to tell everybody that they ought to worship him because he is God. He's not going to be in some back room somewhere like the Pentagon orchestrating stuff. It is going to be a very public, outward defiance against God. Let's look at Daniel 11:37 through 38. He shall pay no attention to the gods of his fathers. Listen to this, because I'm going to predict some things in a minute for what I think this means. He shall pay no attention to the gods of his fathers or to the one beloved by women. He shall not pay attention to any other god, for he shall magnify himself above all. He shall honor the God of fortresses instead of these, a God whom his fathers did not know. He shall honor with gold and silver, with precious stones and costly gifts. Now listen. It says here, he shall honor the God of fortresses instead of these. He shall honor with gold and silver, with precious stones and costly gifts. And it gives a little bit more tidbit. It says, a God his fathers did not know. I believe that the God of fortresses here is almost certainly some defense technology or military might the likes of which the world has ever seen. His fathers before him have not seen it. And the Antichrist is going to pour vast amounts of resources and money into these, and most likely promise world peace through them. He will also think that he's going to be protected by them, but as we're going to see, he will not be. I believe that world events and the way technology is going points to this. Think about it. Israel to this day still refuses to put their hope in the Messiah. Instead of turning to God, what have they put their hope in? They put their hope in their Iron Dome. Missile defense technology that just failed, sadly, but it just failed. But they have poured in loads and loads of money into that missile defense system. It's considered the greatest that the world has seen so far. I remember when visiting Israel, I was told that their border patrol technology alerted them if even a bird flew across the border. That does not come cheap. It's expensive. It's not just Israel that's desperate for defense technology and military strength. Look at our own country. 12% of the federal budget goes to military spending, defense spending. And of course, NATO has its own rocket defense system spread throughout much of Europe, which is a major point of contention in the Ukraine-Russia conflict. How far off are we really from putting the security of the world into the hands of one that assures us peace through fortresses, peace through defense systems? It's already happening. Let's look at Daniel 11:39. He shall deal with the strongest fortresses with the help of a foreign god. Those who acknowledge him, he shall load with honor. He shall make them rulers over many and shall divide the land for a price. This is also already to an extent how NATO operates. It's certainly how the Soviet Union already operated. How far off are we really from nation states being promised security as long as they pay a fee? It's already happening. Now we're going to go through Daniel 11:40 through 45. Pay attention to this because this brings us towards the close of our sermon today. And I really need you to pay attention because this is what ties directly into Revelation. Verse 40, at the time of the end, there we see that phrase again, at the time of the end, the king of the south shall attack him, but the king of the north shall rush upon him like a whirlwind, with chariots and horsemen and with many ships. And he shall come into countries and shall overflow and pass through. He shall come into the glorious land, that's Israel, and tens of thousands shall fall. But these shall be delivered out of his hand, Edom and Moab, and the main part of the Ammonites. He shall stretch out his hand against the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. He shall become ruler of the treasures of gold and of silver, and all the precious things of Egypt, and the Libyans and the Cushites shall follow in his train. But news from the east and north shall alarm him, and he shall go out with great fury to destroy and devote many to destruction. And he shall pitch his palatial tents between the sea and the glorious holy mountain. Yet he shall come to his end with none to help him. In verse 45, it says he shall pitch his palatial tents between the sea and the glorious holy mountain, yet he shall come to his end with none to help him. This is a reference to the battle of Armageddon, which will occur between the holy mountain, Jerusalem, and the sea in the valley of Megiddo. So here's the holy mountain. Here's Megiddo, there's the sea. He's going to pitch his tents right there. The Valley of Megiddo is absolutely huge. You'll hear it at times referred to many things. Valley of Megiddo. Megiddo is a city, now a ruined city, but it's a city within the valley, hence Valley of Megiddo, Valley of Armageddon, denoting the battle that is yet to come, or the Jezreel Valley. You could hear it referred to that. That's its current name. It is absolutely huge. It's surrounded by hills in which the nations of the world will gather for the final battle of mankind. So these pictures are just giving you a small sense of the scale of this valley, and look how flat it is. And it is surrounded by hills on all sides. The valley connects much of the ancient world together. The Via Maris, one of the oldest. It dates back to possibly as early as 3000 BC. So you think our roads are in bad shape. Here's a 5,000-year-old road that runs through this valley. The Egyptians, the Syrians, the Persians, the Romans, and many other civilizations and nations have used it. Why? Because you march through Israel, you march through here to connect the world together. The other pathway is through the Arabian desert. You're not getting through there. This is the route. Now soon we're going to watch a short video clip. And as you watch the clip, the guy who's doing the tour is going to be talking about Megiddo. But I want you looking out beyond that. I want you to look out, pay attention to what he says as well, it matters, but look out beyond that to the scope and the scale of this valley to get a sense of how huge it is. Let's take a look at that clip now.
Welcome to the Holy Land and this biblical site of Tel Megiddo. We're going to be looking at some rich biblical events that have happened here and some that are going to take place at the end of the tribulation period. Now the name Armageddon is derived from the term Har Megiddo, which is translated Armageddon. Har means hill and Megiddo is the place. So when put together it's called Armageddon, and in English the H is taken off, so it's Armageddon in English. Today this place is called Megiddo in English. It's located in the most fertile valley of Israel called the Jezreel Valley, and you can see the Jezreel Valley right in the background. We'll be panning around here to show you that. It's a tell, which is made up of layer upon layer of different civilizations that make up an artificial hill, but there was a hill here to begin with, and then they built upon it for defense purposes. More battles have been fought here than in any other place on earth. Now, why is that the case? Because Megiddo lied at the juncture of several key routes. The main route called the Via Maris, which linked Africa to Asia and Europe. For this reason, any country who rose to world power had to control Megiddo due to its strategic location. And you can still see today the highway here runs by. It's a very busy highway. Why? Because it follows the original Via Maris. And many of the roads here in Israel are the same roads that were trafficked for thousands and thousands of years. So it's a very important place. One of the pharaohs, Thutmose III, said conquering Megiddo is like conquering 1,000 cities. Why? Because it was so important. Now, King Solomon fortified this city and used it as a fort of protection. He had 450 chariots stationed here, and you can see the stables in this video here where he had those. King Ahab later built an amazing water tunnel here to protect it from its enemies. And so you can see down in this tunnel here where he carved it out so he could get water inside the city, so that warring armies outside couldn't stop their water supply and then dry them up, cause them to die of thirst.
So to get a sense of the scale there, if you were paying attention, you realize that King Solomon, in just a portion of those ruins, had 450 chariots. Obviously, it looks like a speck compared to the rest of the whole valley, but it actually is quite large. We will be learning more about this coming battle in our study on Revelation, and rest assured, it will happen. John saw it in his vision. Daniel saw it in his vision. Now, I want to give a word of hope and a word of warning as we close out today. A major theme throughout the entire book of Daniel is that no kingdom lasts that turns away from the Lord, no matter how strong they may seem. Every world empire has fallen, and they have fallen while mocking God. The Babylonian Empire, when they fell, they had risen to the greatest empire the world has ever seen. The walls were at least 24 feet thick around the city. They thought they could not be conquered. When they defied God by drinking out of the vessels from the temple, they fell within one night. One night. Nations that mock God do not stand. Our own nation, just like the Babylonians, the Persians, the Greeks, the Ptolemies, the Seleucids, and the Romans before us, has come to a place where God is being blasphemed and mocked, and God will not tolerate it. There is coming a day when the Antichrist will rise, and many of the nations of the world will follow him, and they will follow his hollow promises of protection and peace. And he too will mock God. And on that day, though, the best defense technology and greatest military strength that the world has ever seen won't stand a chance against the might of the one true God. The Antichrist will come to his end, and there is nothing that any person or anything will be able to do about it. I look forward to being on the winning side that day. Any believer that lives through those times will have gone through tremendous persecution, as we are already starting to. But brothers and sisters, we will be on the winning side. Many will lose their lives. We will be starving. We will be hurt. But we will be on the winning side. Let's pray. Dear Jesus, we look forward to the day when you make all things right, when you rule and there is no challenge to your authority, when the whole world drops to their knees and knows beyond a shadow of a doubt that you are the living God. Lord, we thank you that we have the privilege of being called your people. Lord, help us to remain faithful to you in the days to come. We love you, Lord, in your name. Amen.